5 topics which I see as, yes, probably trends for the year 2016, but trends that are on a razor-thin line between hope, expectation on one side, and illusion on the other. I would also like to connect those trends to some questions which always jump in at the wrong time, maybe political, geopolitical questions, which we all too often underestimate in the private sector, maybe some intercultural questions that come to my mind, or just questions that are somehow influenced by the tensions we're facing right now in the transatlantic sphere where we are, and I'd like to say that at the beginning, at the very moment, probably are in the most difficult time I have sensed during the last couple of years, regardless whether I was under the political circus tent or now in the private sector. So I'd like to combine those let's say, issues into 4 major points, which I would call illusions, but also somehow expectations for the year 2016. Don't be scared, this is a lot of paper. I try to make it as short as possible, because I do know my breakfast will be waiting at around 12, and it's probably then your lunch. So, talking about the first illusion, I'd like to connect it to what we have faced in Paris and what we have seen in San Bernardino now. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that this has been the last occurrence in that regard. And if I just may say that as a footnote, I know that I have to be careful with footnotes, but just as a tiny footnote, we just have been lucky in our country so far that we haven't seen a terror attack as we've seen them in Paris or at other places. So, first expectation of many, I think illusion in that regard. Will we see a movement towards illicit and terrorist content being removed from internet platforms by companies, by digital platform providers? And do we see preventive measures that will come to conclusions where we could actually come to better expectations in many regards? You have followed the discussions. Some of the major companies are under scrutiny in that very regard. Maybe Facebook, maybe Alphabet/Google, maybe Twitter. They're all facing increasing pressure right now to monitor, to remove violent content and propaganda from terror groups. It was just last week that Facebook removed a profile page used by one of the 2 people suspected of killing the 14 people in San Bernardino, and a spokesman said the page violated Facebook's community standards. What a word. That among other things, bar posts, photos, or videos that support terrorism or glorify violence. Cynically, one could say, and that's a debate which has not come to an end yet, why care about a plethora of legal questions around the globe if you have the power, and it is a powerful element, we're talking about a huge community, if you have the power of community standards. The other suspect, last week, Tashfeen Malik, had published a post around the time of the shooting, but there Facebook declined to disclose its contents. So it shows already the difficulty of these issues I've been stressing upon here. Good news is, all of those 3 companies, and it's way more of course, I've mentioned Facebook, Alphabet, YouTube specifically, Twitter, have employed technology to scan for images now related to child sexual abuse. And you know of Hanif Farid, who is a computer scientist at Dartmouth College, who helped develop the system. He is one who believes now that this could be expanded to other types of questionable content. And I guess here we already start facing the first hope, yes, for 2016, but probably also illusion. Why is that so? It's a challenge for several reasons. First, technologically, but also in respect of what's given so far. The child exploitation scans employ a database of known images that are there, created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There's no similar database that could be compared to that very thing that relates to terrorism. And that brings me to the second difficulty and big question, and that's one we have debated for years. And I remember when I was in my first office as Minister for Economics and Technology, that was also part of the description at that time, that we already had a debate at this time that whenever you would use or you would try to create a database where disturbing images or disturbing content would be gathered and then used as for a tool to cut the content out of the internet, you are back at this almost already traditional debate of censorship and internet, and some thought we have overcome this already. We haven't. We are in the midst of it again, just because of the occurrences we have seen so far. So aside from community standards, we still face a couple of other challenges, and one is almost a truism, but one I encounter whenever I decide either to invest in young companies or when we consult companies that are already established so far. On one side, you have a disturbing lack of knowledge within and amongst those companies when it comes to larger geopolitical questions, when it comes to political interrelated questions, when it comes to risk clusters that could appear on the horizon, and to intercultural questions. And on the other hand, of course, and many of you have encountered that again and again, you have a dramatic lack of knowledge still in the public sector regarding newest technologies and whatever may come out of it. So we've heard many promising speeches during the last couple of years from the political side, how much more understanding there is. Well, there is more understanding, but in respect of the pace we face in the tech world and the digital world, politics will never come to grip with that kind of pace. And my current take is that both worlds, actually both planets, couldn't be more detached from each other. It makes it more and more difficult to find solutions in that regard. You've heard the Commissioner this morning, who is, I think, in a good position to address many issues that are of concern for you. The problem we have in Europe is the same problem we have in Germany over here and many other countries. You have so many departments, so many ministries, so many commissioners dealing with digital questions, with legal questions related to that, tech issues and other things. It's almost impossible to find the right spot where you would like to address something that could be transmitted into something useful the next morning or a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later. Again, the detachment, in my opinion, here is growing. Regarding the terror threat, of course, there have been a couple of steps being made. One relevant step in that regard was the European Parliament that voted just a couple of weeks ago in a non-binding report, by the way, that criminal law would actually be imposed or could be imposed on companies if they don't comply. In that respect, I think the Commissioner has told you a couple of things about the latest meetings last week between the Commission and the private sector in the aftermath of the Paris attacks. However, in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, concluding the first quote-unquote hope and illusion, I don't think that 2016 will be the year that this question will come to a resolution, partly because we are still dealing with with such a variety of legal systems, with such a Vanity Fair on both sides of the Atlantic, who is bringing up the right idea of how to tackle those questions correctly? Still with an unresolved question, how would intelligence services interact with and security services interact with the private sector? So it's something where I don't see much promising steps so far. And I've took the example because it will have repercussions regardless to what business that's somehow connected with data gathering, that's somehow connected with the question of could terror elements and other elements lead to the again and again led discussion of security on one side, and this brings me to the second point, then data protection on the other side. So second illusion, and second major point for not only next year, was a point for the last couple of years, it's almost an epic debate. It's this intersection of security and privacy on the other side, and I specifically would like to concentrate here on the question of encryption. It has a lot in common with the first point, and it is a discussion which lets the pendulum swing whenever we see a new act of terror, whenever we see a new large or major criminal act somewhere around the globe. So in the current world, it must be wonderful as a terrorist not only to superficially control the levels of fear, but also to have access to the most efficient encryption technologies. So the debate got more heated following, again, the Paris attacks, as governments across both sides of the Atlantic have re-engaged with tech companies about how to reconcile the need for safeguarding the internet without providing ultra-secure communication tools that terrorists can utilize. The Obama administration, which is in a remarkable lame duck mood at the very moment in the format of the elections next year, the administration says that the Islamic State has used a range of encryption technologies over the past year and a half, many of which defy cracking by the NSA. So some over here will say, well, fantastic, finally we have something the NSA can't deal with. In that very regard, we need them to deal with also our security agencies over here. And some of the most powerful technologies are, as you all know, free, easily available. Names like Signal, Vickr, Telegram, which encode mobile messages from cell phones. Telegram was used by ISIS to deliver the messages after the crash of the Russian airplane in the Sinai, and also the broadcast responsibility for the Paris carnage. On the other hand, the company's thought, and highly understandable thought, is that strong encryption protects consumers, and that providing a way for police to eavesdrop would even open the door to exploitation by criminals and by repressive governments. So that is the state of play that hasn't changed too much. Will it be resolved in 2016? Not very likely, ladies and gentlemen. The political climate, all to all, is too toxic. We are living in a period of fear, undeniably, maybe in the US, more and more in Europe, of course, as well. We are facing transatlantic tensions, mutual finger-pointing after the NSA scandal, all the other things. Things have not moved to the better in that very regard. We have a growing anti-Americanism in this country, which is of quite some concern for me. Of course, there have been a lot of steps being made on the other side of the Atlantic as well to foster it, but it doesn't help. We have growing nationalism in the European Union, which does not bring us closer to unity when it comes to resolve those questions, and to have a strong European voice where we could confront also the US and other partners somehow strongly, and not just as a weak, fragmented part we are sitting in. And then, of course, we have an election year in the US, which I can only describe with the term remarkable